Hey there. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story. I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let your mind drift. These horror stories will crawl under your skin and linger in the dark. Let's begin. The first time the dog refused to go outside, I thought it was just the cold. We'd just moved to a cabin about 30 miles north of the last town, and the snow hadn't let up in 3 days. But when he stood stiff in the doorway, staring into the tree line like something was staring back, I started to wonder if it was something else. My name's Martin. I left a construction job down in Juneau last fall after my brother died. Needed the space, the quiet. The land came cheap because no one had lived on it in years. Off-grid, wood stove, haul your own water kind of life. I figured if I could make it through the winter, I could handle anything. It wasn't long before I got into the rhythm of things. Split wood in the mornings, fix what needed fixing. Cook simple meals, read, sleep early, no internet, no distractions. I liked the silence at first, but then the nights started dragging out, the kind of dark that feels too heavy, like it's pressing on the windows. I'd sometimes hear cracking sounds in the woods, not animal sounds, something slower, heavier. I told myself it was ice shifting. Around the second week of January, I found boot prints near the edge of the property. They weren't mine. Wrong size, wider gate. They led up along the back shed and stopped clean. No return trail. I stood out there staring at them for longer than I should have. The dog wouldn't even come out with me. His hackles were up and he kept turning in tight little circles, whining like he was being watched. That night, I locked the door for the first time since I moved in. Things started happening in slow drips. The window above the sink had smudges, like fingertips dragging down the glass. I'd hear crunching footsteps outside long after midnight. Once, while chopping wood, I found a strand of something strung across 2 trees, thin and pale, like a fishing line, but almost sticky. I cut it down and tossed it, but it was back the next day, strung the exact same way. I stopped walking out past the tree line. There were too many places where the trees grew too close and sound didn't carry right. I started sleeping in my clothes, with the axe beside the bed. One evening, I came back from hauling water and the door was already open. I stopped cold, watching it swing slightly in the wind. The dog growled low in his throat, but didn't bark. The fire inside was still going, but everything was too still. I stepped in slowly. The room smelled like pine sap and damp leather. That's when I saw the footprints on the floor, in a melting trail of snow, leading down into the crawlspace hatch I'd never opened. The hatch was slightly ajar. I stood there, breathing so hard, my ears rang. The dog had backed up into the corner, tail tucked. I said, "Hello," like an idiot, like someone was going to answer. And then I heard it, a quiet, dragging breath, wet, close, coming from below. The hatch creaked a little wider. I didn't move. That dragging breath kept going, like whoever or whatever was down there was trying not to make a sound, but couldn't help it. The crawlspace hatch stayed half open, and I swear I saw the slightest shadow shift behind the gap. My hand tightened around the axe handle. Every instinct screamed to get out of the house, but my legs felt heavy, like they were trying to root me in place. The dog whimpered once, sharp and panicked. I whispered, quiet, not taking my eyes off the hatch. I took one slow step backward, then another. And when the floor creaked, the breathing stopped. Silence. That kind of silence you only get way out in the bush, where no cars, no people, nothing cuts through it. And then I heard the creak of the wooden frame under the floor, weight shifting, something moving under the boards. I bolted, kicked the door open, dog right behind me, and ran through the knee-deep snow toward the truck. I hadn't started it in days. I jumped in, jammed the key in the ignition, and prayed. It turned once, twice, nothing. The third time, it caught coughing smoke. I didn't look back. I just drove, fishtailing on the ice, headlights bouncing through the dark trees. I made it to the highway and kept going until I saw lights, a gas station that doubled as a bar and post office. I must have looked wild because the guy behind the counter didn't even ask questions, just pointed toward the payphone. I called the troopers, told them someone had broken into my place and was hiding underneath. They took it seriously. I guess out here, strange stuff isn't so rare. It took them hours to get out there, but when they did, they didn't find anyone in the crawl space. Nothing under the house at all. No footprints either, except mine, and the old ones I'd already seen days before. The hatch was open, like I said, but inside, dust, webs, dry. No signs of any recent presence. One of the troopers asked me if I'd been alone too long, if maybe I'd heard an animal or imagined it. The other guy just looked at the dog, still shaking, and didn't say anything. They let me stay overnight at a ranger's station down the road. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I went back with one of the troopers. Broad daylight. I didn't want to, but I needed to see it again. I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. The place felt hollow, not just empty, but wrong. Like the walls had shifted just a little. Like the shadows didn't quite fall where they used to. And in the crawl space, just barely visible at the far corner, I found something I knew hadn't been there before. A shirt. It wasn't mine. Old, faded, looked hand-stitched, and it smelled like soil and rot. The trooper took it without saying a word, dropped it into a bag. A few days later, they called, said it matched clothing found in a missing persons case from 4 years back. A trapper who'd gone missing during winter, never found. No sign of his camp or gear, just vanished. I didn't go back after that. Left the cabin, sold it cheap to a guy who wanted it for hunting. I didn't tell him everything, just said I didn't like the winters. Last I heard, the guy only stayed 1 season, never said why he left, just packed up one day and never came back. Sometimes I still dream about that breathing, not loud, just slow, wet, like someone waiting for me to get close enough to the hatch again. Story 2. The ice road to the camp was only meant to be temporary. A company had cut it through permafrost and muskeg during the dead of winter to reach an exploration site near a dried-up river bend. When the thaw came, the road would vanish. The crew knew this. They'd brought just enough gear to finish what needed finishing before April. It was routine. They'd done it before. The team was small, 5 men, 2 drill operators, a geotech, a cook, and a foreman named Garvey. The kind of crew that didn't ask too many questions. They were there to log samples, keep to schedule, and get out. The site itself was just a clearing near an old landslide scar, ringed by spruce and deadfall. There'd been rumors that the area had seen trouble back in the 90s. Missing trappers, unexplained injuries. But no one on the crew believed in that kind of thing. They didn't bring it up. For the first 2 weeks, everything went as expected. Days were cold but manageable. Nights were dark and uneventful. The kind of work that dulls your nerves and keeps your head down. But then, on the 17th night, the cook, Anton, was late for dinner. That wasn't like him. He was rigid, obsessive. When Garvey went to check the bunkhouse, he found Anton sitting on his cot, fully dressed, just staring at the floor. "You all right?" Garvey asked. Anton didn't answer at first. Then he said, "There was someone in here last night." He sounded certain. Garvey checked the locks. There were no signs of forced entry. Snow around the building was undisturbed. He chalked it up to stress. The isolation could mess with your sense of time. He told Anton to get some rest. The next morning, the crew found something beside the drill stack. A rabbit, skinned and hung by its hind legs. Still warm, fresh, but they were too far out for hunters. No tracks in the snow leading up to it. Just the rabbit swaying slightly in the morning wind. They disposed of it and got back to work. That night, the wind picked up. The tents groaned, thin nylon snapping in gusts. One of the drill operators, Luis, swore he saw someone walking the tree line just past the fuel drums. A figure, no flashlight, no coat. But when they searched, they found nothing. No prints, just long drag marks, like something had been pulled. Luis didn't sleep. Neither did the rest of them. Not really. Over the next few days, things got worse. The second operator, Jason, started leaving his tent at night. They'd find him standing in the snow, barefoot, staring into the trees. He'd come back in the morning with no memory of it. When they tried to keep him inside, he became violent. Garvey had to duct tape the zipper shut from the outside. Then Anton disappeared. No signs of struggle. His gear was still in his bunk, boots missing. The snowstorm that night had buried the trails, but they found a single set of prints leading north. Only one, deep enough to show the soles of the company-issued boots. They stopped about 100 yards from camp, next to a downed tree. Beyond that, just open snow. They filed a report by sat phone, but it was days before anyone responded. By the time the helicopter arrived, only 3 men were left. Garvey, Luis, and Jason, who had been tied down with paracord after trying to walk into the woods a second time. None of them spoke during the flight out. No one pressed them. In the incident report filed later that month, there was a handwritten note from the responding ranger. Unclear cause. 1 fatality, 1 missing, others non-coherent. Environmental stress cited. Recommend no further operations in that region. No charges, no investigation, no follow-up. The area was scrubbed from the company's development plans by the end of spring. Locals still talk about it, quietly, and not for long. Luis was the first to speak once the helicopter cleared the basin. His voice cracked from disuse. "He's still out there," he said, staring out the side window, eyes tracking the tree line long after it vanished beneath the snow clouds. No one responded. Jason had stopped struggling during the flight, but he kept his eyes shut, jaw clenched, like he was chewing through something he couldn't swallow. Garvey just watched the altimeter, focused on the numbers climbing. When they landed back at base, the medics took Jason first. Luis followed without a word. Garvey stayed behind to sign the reports, debrief the company liaison, and sit through questions that circled the same 3 points. When was the last time you saw Anton? Did you notice signs of mental strain? Any wildlife in the area? He answered them honestly. He told them what they'd seen. The rabbit, the figure, the missing prints, the one-way tracks, the look on Anton's face that last morning. but he could see it in their eyes. They weren't writing any of it down. They were nodding to be polite. He was sent home the next day. Not fired, just released early. No one mentioned hazard pay, no follow-up calls. It was like the entire job had been erased. 3 weeks later, Garvey got a call from Luis. "He's gone," Luis said. "Who?" Garvey asked, though he already knew. Jason walked out in the middle of the night, in his pajamas. The nurse left a door cracked. He went through the woods behind the clinic. They found his footprints at the fence, then nothing. Garvey didn't know what to say. Luis hesitated, then added, "Same pattern, straight line," then just stopped. He hung up before Garvey could ask more. That was the last contact between any of them. Garvey kept tabs on the region, though, quietly, he watched news bulletins, company notices, anything he could get his hands on. The exploration zone was blacked out by spring, canceled. No public explanation. The area was marked on new maps as a wildlife rehabilitation corridor. No construction, no hunting, no fly zones, enforced by local charter outfits. The kind of reclassification that didn't just happen. 1 month after the site was shut down, a ranger was reported missing. She'd been posted at a nearby watchtower and failed to check in for 3 consecutive days. Her snowmobile was found near the tree line, engine off, keys still in the ignition. There were footprints, again, human, one set, deep and straight. They ended 10 feet into the trees. Garvey clipped the article and kept it in a folder. He didn't show anyone. He never worked remote sites again. He took a city job, never told the full story, and made peace with the fact that nobody wanted the truth. Not the company, not the investigators, not even the families. And for years, he thought maybe that would be the end of it. Until a brown envelope arrived at his apartment. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a clearing, snow-covered, tree line bent inward, like something had pressed the trees down from above. And in the center, half buried under snow and old brush, was a faded orange tent. Company issue, the same model used during the winter deployment, and written on the back, in shaky ink, "They don't leave, they wait." Garvey didn't sleep that night, and in the morning, he bought blackout curtains. Then he took his phone apart and dumped the pieces in separate trash bins across the city. No one has heard from him since. Story 3. He told us not to go past the red ribbon on the spruce trees. Said it was a property boundary, but the way he said it didn't feel legal. It felt like a warning. I remember thinking the place was too quiet for summer. 3 of us had rented the cabin for a fishing trip. Me, Kevin, and Lorna. We'd been friends since college, and this was supposed to be our break. No phones, just glacier rivers, campfires, and enough whiskey to forget how far we'd drifted over the years. The man who owned the cabin met us out front when we pulled in. Tall, wiry, maybe in his 60s. He didn't give a name, just handed me a single key and pointed toward the tree line. "See those red ribbons?" he said. "Stay inside that line. Don't go past it. If you hear something out there, you didn't." He walked back into the woods before I could ask what he meant. Lorna gave me a look, and Kevin laughed. "All right then," he said. "Solid start." The first night was calm. We cooked trout over the fire pit and watched the sun crawl along the horizon, never quite setting. Northern summer, that eternal golden hour. I didn't think much about the ribbons until I went to piss behind the shed and noticed one fluttering gently on a branch. It was frayed at the ends, like it had been there a long time. The next morning, Lorna said she heard footsteps outside the cabin around 3 a.m. Not animal footsteps, she said. Heavy, 2 legs. Kevin shrugged it off. Moose, big ones, sound like people sometimes. But Lorna shook her head. No, it stopped right outside my window. Then I heard it breathing. That day, we hiked down to the river. No cell signal, but we had the GPS loaded up beforehand, and I kept track of the ribbons. They looped around in a strange shape, too uneven to be property lines. At one point, we found an old rusted lantern wedged between 2 tree roots, glass cracked, long dead. Later that night, Kevin found something carved into the base of the cabin porch. He was flicking ash off his cigarette when he ran his fingers across it. There's something scratched into the wood, he said. Looks like tally marks. We counted 42, all the same length, all straight, carved deep into the grain like someone was keeping score. That night, we didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, the air turned sharp cold. Lorna sat up suddenly in her cot and said, "Do you hear that?" At first, I didn't, but then it came, crunching, soft and slow. Walking around the outside of the cabin, Kevin mouthed, "Bear," but I shook my head. It didn't sound like that. There was a rhythm to the steps, then silence, and then the handle on the front door shifted, just a twitch, once. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. The dog that lived next door, some scrappy mutt that belonged to the owner, howled once in the distance and was immediately cut off. The steps didn't continue. Nothing else happened. At sunrise, we checked around the cabin. No tracks, no scuffs on the door, but every ribbon we could see from the porch was gone. Just the branches where they'd been tied, hanging bare. We didn't talk much that day. Kevin kept looking over his shoulder. Lorna smoked 3 times as much. I tried to radio out with the emergency set we brought, but all we got was static. That night, it started again. We heard it from farther off at first. Branches snapping, something heavy moving between trees. Then came the whistle, high-pitched, 3 notes, not wind, a pattern. It repeated. Lorna whispered, "We need to leave, right now." I agreed. We packed as quickly as we could. I ran around back to grab the cooler and froze. The ribbons were back, all of them, but they weren't tied to trees anymore. They were stretched across the ground, crisscrossed through the clearing, wrapping around brush and nailed into trunks, like a web, a boundary. But this time, we were inside it, trapped, and then the whistling stopped. That's when we heard it. A second set of footsteps, faster, closer, coming right toward the cabin. I dropped the cooler. The ice scattered across the moss, and I didn't stop to grab anything. The sound of those footsteps was closing in, fast, snapping brush, breathing hard, like whatever it was didn't care about being quiet anymore. Lorna was already inside, shoving the deadbolt into place, her hands shaking. Kevin stood in the middle of the room, holding a fireplace poker, like he actually thought it would help. I slammed the door shut and braced it with my shoulder. Outside, everything went still again. No footsteps, no wind. Then something tapped the wall, not the door, farther back, near where the bathroom was. Then another tap, near the window. A rhythm, the same 3 beats as the whistle from earlier. Tap, tap, tap. Lorna crouched behind the table, whispering over and over, "We should have left, we should have left." Kevin looked at me. "It's trying to scare us, that's all. It's just some freak." He barely got the sentence out before the power went out. No lights, no fridge hum, just the last glow from the fire slowly dying down. I pulled the flashlight from the drawer. but the beam barely reached the windows. We stayed that way for maybe 10 minutes. No more tapping, just the deep quiet of remote woods and the awareness that something or someone was still out there. Then the back door creaked open. We had locked it. I remember clearly. I'd turned the deadbolt myself, but now it hung ajar by an inch, just enough to let the cold creep in. Kevin moved first. He kicked the door the rest of the way open and pointed the flashlight out. Nothing, just trees. Snow glittered faintly in the beam. Then he lowered the light to the threshold. Boot prints, coming in just one set. He backed up slowly, and that's when we all saw what was scratched into the inside of the doorframe. 3 more tallies, not carved like the ones on the porch. These were fresh. The wood curled at the edges where something sharp had dragged through. Lorna snapped. She grabbed the car keys and ran for the front door. I caught up just in time to stop her from throwing it open. The red ribbons were on the windows now, all of them, hung across like someone had wrapped the entire cabin in them. Taut, clean, not one out of place. We were sealed. At some point, we must have dozed off. Exhaustion, fear, it all blends together. I woke to daylight and silence. Kevin was asleep, sitting up against the wall, poker still in his hands. Lorna lay curled up by the table, eyes open but unfocused. The ribbons were gone. Everything looked normal. Even the back door was shut and locked again. We stepped outside, slow, cautious, waiting for something to jump or move. But nothing happened. We left everything behind, didn't even grab our bags, just got in the truck and drove until we hit signal again. When we told the nearest ranger what happened, he just frowned and said he'd mention it to the property owner. That was it. Weeks later, I checked satellite images of the area, zoomed in close. You could just barely make out that the cabin and the trees around it formed a rough shape, not quite a square, more like a loop, a boundary. I don't know what was out there. I don't think it was an animal, and I don't think it was just a person. But I do know something didn't want us crossing that line, and I still don't know what would have happened if we had. Story 4. In October of 2012, a floatplane pilot named Brent McAllister was contracted to fly 3 researchers into a remote section of interior Alaska. The job was filed as a routine biological survey with no specifics on the subject matter. The pickup location was at a seasonal fuel depot near a defunct airstrip. The 3 researchers were not affiliated with any known university or government agency, and their permit paperwork was incomplete, though no red flags were raised at the time. Brent had logged thousands of hours in Alaska's interior. He'd flown oil surveyors, wildlife trackers, even the occasional medevac. This drop was unusual only in how little was explained. He noted that none of the passengers gave last names. The woman in the group introduced herself as Kara. The 2 men were quieter. One had an old duffel bag marked with military tags. The other carried a hard case with no labels. The coordinates they provided pointed to a wide gravel bar near an abandoned fire scar. It was about 90 miles from the nearest homestead and unreachable except by air. The site had no cabin, no shelter, just a flat open stretch near a bend in a Blackwater River. Brent noted that the area had once been marked as restricted airspace decades earlier due to a forest fire containment zone. But that classification had long since expired. They didn't seem bothered by the remoteness. Brent helped them offload 6 crates of equipment. One of the men asked him to return in 5 days, no sooner, no later. The way he said it stuck with Brent. Not a request, a condition. He left them there just after noon. Weather was stable. No interference on the radio. The return flight was uneventful. 5 days later, Brent flew back in. He circled the site twice before touching down. From the air, he could see the crates had been moved into a tight square, partially covered in tarp. There was no visible tent, no smoke, no people. Once on the ground, Brent waited near the plane. Standard procedure. But no one came to meet him. He called out. Nothing. After 10 minutes, he walked the edge of the gravel bar, stopping short of the tree line. What he found were drag marks, 4 of them, parallel, leading from the tarp structure to the forest. No footprints. The crates had been opened. Some equipment had been left behind. A solar panel, a GPS unit, crushed. A small stack of field notebooks burned at the edges, still damp from smilt. One page remained legible, dated the 2nd day of the trip. The handwriting was uneven. They don't move when we watch, but they don't stop. Brent contacted the FAA by radio. He was told to remain in the area. A patrol chopper was dispatched, arriving 5 hours later. By then, visibility had dropped. Snow was coming in from the west. The search lasted 2 days, hampered by early frost and failing light. No bodies were found. No gear was recovered beyond the crates. No tracks led beyond the initial drag marks. Thermal scans showed nothing. The case was logged as unresolved missing persons. No charges were filed. There were no next of kin listed. A month later, a 4th crate, one Brent didn't remember unloading, was found washed up 20 miles downstream. It contained only one item, a camera. The hard drive had been removed. In its place was a folded note sealed in vacuum plastic, written in black marker, "Do not bring anyone else here." That crate is currently stored at a state evidence facility under restricted access. The river region in question has since been reclassified, not as protected land, not as wildlife territory, just restricted again. No flights are authorized, no explanation provided, and no one has returned. Brent didn't fly for nearly a year after the incident. At first, he told people it was burnout. Flying in and out of backcountry strips for 20 years takes a toll. But those close to him noticed the difference. He stopped answering calls from old clients. He kept his radio off. Some nights, he'd sit outside in the dark behind his hangar and just stare at the tree line, like he expected something to come out of it. The state never pressed him. There was a quiet understanding that it was better not to pursue details. Whatever had happened, the official story would stay clean. It always did. But Brent kept thinking about the crate, the 4th one, the one he didn't remember unloading. He replayed the drop-off in his head again and again, trying to account for it. His logbook said 6 crates, not 7. He would have noticed another, he was sure. And then, in late winter, he got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was clipped, anxious. "You still flying?" the caller asked. Brent hesitated. "Not for that kind of job. They're gone," the voice said. But not all the way. Then the line went dead. He tried to trace the number. Burn phone. No records. That night, Brent drove to the airport alone. He went into his hangar and pulled the canvas tarp off his plane, the same one he'd flown to the river site. He hadn't touched it since the retrieval. Something had been bothering him for months, something he couldn't name. He climbed into the fuselage, flashlight in hand, and started checking the storage compartments. Fuel cells, cargo holds, behind the passenger seat. In the rear cavity, behind the insulation panel. He found a fragment of cloth, torn, folded, wedged deep where it didn't belong. It was stained dark and stiff, and it smelled like river mud. Worse, inside the fold was a slip of lined notepaper, wrinkled. It had been there for months, he figured, maybe longer. The handwriting was tight, cramped, not the same as in the field log. Different pen, the message read. You're being watched for compliance. This is not your property. Do not attempt contact. Brent dropped the paper and didn't sleep for the next 3 days. By spring, he'd relocated, quietly, sold the hangar, moved his plane to a private lot. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. But in July, a private pilot in a neighboring township reported seeing a man matching Brent's description, flying solo along the coast, far from usual paths, skimming low over river deltas where no airstrips existed. They said the plane wasn't broadcasting a transponder signal. It was flying dark. That was the last verified sighting. 6 months later, a camera bag washed ashore on the edge of an estuary 200 miles from the original drop zone. Inside were 2 items: a single photo, blurred and taken at night, of a person standing in front of what looked like a tree, except the bark bent away from their body, like it was reacting to them, and the same handwriting as the first note, scribbled in pen across the back of the photo. We watched it move. No one followed up. The case was never reopened. Brent McAllister's pilot license quietly expired the following year. As of now, his whereabouts remain unknown. Story 5. We found the recording after the snow melted. I was part of a volunteer trail crew that maintained remote hiking routes north of the range. We worked off satellite maps and old trail logs, many of them decades out of date, so it wasn't unusual to stumble across old structures, collapsed cabins, rusted-out trapper shacks, the occasional bare-shoed cooler. But this one was different. We were 3 days into the bush when we found the shelter. It was tucked into a gulch, half swallowed by moss and alder trees. The door was still intact, though it took some work to wedge it open. Inside, the air smelled sour and metallic to bunks, a broken lantern, torn thermal blankets. Nothing strange until Kira found the recorder. It was an old, handheld, late 90s maybe, duct tape on the back, dirt in the speaker grill. There were still 2 AA batteries inside. To our surprise, when she pressed play, it whirred to life. There was no time stamp, no name, just the sound of breathing, then a man's voice, thin and shaking. Day 5, I think. Not sure anymore. Lost track. Whatever it was came back last night. Same scratching under the floorboards. It always starts there. Then the footsteps around the shelter. Always walking, never running, but it knows where I am. We all looked at each other. More silence, then the voice continued. I thought it was a moose at first. That's what I told myself. Then I saw the tracks, human, bare feet, middle of winter. I covered them, but they came back. A long pause. You could hear something tapping in the background. Not on the recorder, on the recording. Something faint and rhythmic. I don't think it wants in. Not yet. I think it wants me to open the door. That's where the first clip ended. We sat there in the cabin, all of us staring at the recorder, like it might say more on its own. Kira rewound it and hit play again, but nothing new. I scanned the bunks and floor. No signs of anyone living there recently. No food cans, no prints. Just dust and old wool blankets, stiff with age. We camped nearby that night, maybe 100 yards up the ridge. None of us said it, but nobody wanted to sleep inside the shelter. Not after that. Sometime after midnight, I woke to hear movement outside. Not heavy, just that light crunching of footsteps on frost-crusted grass. I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. Nothing. Then I noticed the moss outside the trailhead sign had been disturbed, not trampled, peeled back. A hand-sized patch, clean and circular, as if someone had scraped it up with bare fingers. No animal tracks, no wind strong enough to do that. I lay awake until dawn. The others didn't sleep either. In the morning, the recorder was gone. We tore the camp apart looking for it. Nothing. We even checked the shelter again. Empty. We debated hiking out, but Kira insisted we log the next section before heading back. I agreed. We didn't want to explain to the regional office why we abandoned an assigned grid, but I marked the gulch, flagged it in red on the GPS. Just a quiet note in our report. Unmarked shelter, possible prior occupancy, avoid for future overnights. That night, we camped farther out, halfway up the next ridge. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps came back. This time, they didn't stop at the edge of camp. They circled the tents. We lay there, frozen, listening. One of us whispered, "It's gotta be a person, right?" But no one answered. And then something brushed against the fabric of my tent wall. Soft, slow, like fingertips dragging along canvas. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then I heard it. That same voice from the recorder. Only this time it was outside the tent. I think it wants me to open the door. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling of the tent, gripping the zipper in the dark. The voice had sounded too close, just on the other side of the nylon, like someone kneeling beside me, whispering through the fabric. I didn't dare respond, didn't dare move. I could hear my own pulse drumming in my ears, and under that, the soft rhythm of something circling again, measured and deliberate. Not the shambling steps of an animal, not the crunch of snowshoes, just bare feet on frost. Kira hissed my name from her tent. Not loud, but enough to cut through the silence. I couldn't respond. Then I heard her unzip a slow scrape of teeth along the canvas. I wanted to yell, to stop her, but I couldn't make a sound. I didn't hear her get out. I just heard the pause, like she was halfway through, holding the flap open, and then nothing. No footsteps, no sound at all. Seconds passed, then minutes. My hand cramped from gripping the zipper. When I finally found the nerve to move, I reached for my headlamp and clicked it on inside the tent. The beam hit the wall, casting my shadow long and bent. I counted to 10, unzipped the door just enough to peek out. Her tent was empty, the flap wide open, her gear still inside. I scrambled out, calling her name low and panicked, trying not to wake the entire ridge. The other tents stirred behind me. Kevin emerged next, rubbing his eyes, confused and pale. "She's gone," I said, already running toward the shelter. The sky was starting to pale, that silver edge of morning pushing through the trees. I sprinted down the slope, brush slapping my legs, until the clearing came into view. I stopped at the edge of the gulch, chest heaving, cold air burning in my lungs. The door was open. The shelter stood the way we left it, slumped and rotting. But now the door hung crooked on its hinge, swaying gently. I shouted her name again, louder this time. No answer. I stepped in. The air inside was thick, still sour. Nothing had changed except for one thing. The recorder was back, sitting neatly on the bunk where Kira had first picked it up. I pressed play. This time, it didn't start with breathing. It started with her voice. Kira, July 17th. Morning now. I think it's morning. Her voice sounded strained, like she was trying to sound calm but couldn't. I woke up outside the tent. I don't remember walking out. The moss was all pulled back under my feet. My socks were wet, but not cold. I think it took me here. I don't know why. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing faster now. I don't think it's trying to hurt me. I think it wants to be seen. The recording clicked off abruptly. I ran out of the shelter, yelling for help, yelling her name, until Kevin and the others reached me. We swept the area for hours, grid by grid. No tracks, no broken brush, not even a direction to follow. We called in search and rescued by noon. A full team arrived by nightfall. Helicopters, dogs, nothing turned up. They questioned all of us. They asked if there'd been an argument, if she had any reason to leave on her own. We all told them the same thing. She disappeared between one step and the next. We never saw her again. 3 weeks later, after we were back in town, I got a call from the trail crew lead. He told me they'd gone back to the gulch to retrieve the shelter's coordinates and found the recorder again. Another new message, this one shorter. The same voice, Kira's, soft and close. I think it's learning how to be human. Click. No one went back after that. The GPS log was wiped. The gulch isn't on the official trail maps anymore. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night. Sure, I heard it. The slow drag of fingers against fabric, and the voice asking to come in. Story 6. I never thought a place so cold could feel so alive. Back in 2004, I was working as a technician for a remote relay station up north. One of those spots nobody wants to be, except for the few who actually have to. It was February, dead of winter, and I was there solo for 2 weeks. The kind of job where you're cut off from everything except your radio and the endless white landscape. People always ask if being alone out there creeps you out. Honestly, it did, but not the way you'd expect. It wasn't loneliness. It was something else. A feeling that the silence was watching you just as much as you were watching it. The relay station was a small metal box set on stilts, with antennas poking up like needles into the gray sky. The heater hummed constantly, and the walls were thin enough that every creak and groan from the ice outside felt loud. The days were routine. Check the power systems, test the antenna, log the signal quality, and keep an eye on the fuel levels. At night, the wind slammed against the building, and I swear I could hear whispers mixed with the howling. I'd try to tell myself it was the radio static, or maybe the way the snow shifts. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. On the 8th day, I started hearing footsteps outside. Not the crunch of boots or the slap of animal paws, but softer, like someone pacing slowly around the perimeter. I'd freeze and listen, waiting for a second set of footsteps to show up or a shadow to pass the frosted window. But nothing ever did. Just that slow, measured circling. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't normal either. The strangest thing was how the equipment acted. Sometimes the radio would crackle with voices, just barely audible, never clear enough to understand. Once, I even heard my own name whispered through the static, so faint I thought I imagined it. The antenna's signal would dip for no reason, like something was interfering, but there was nothing out there to explain it. I checked every connection, every cable, but found nothing. By the time I hit day 11, the footsteps were a regular thing. They'd start around dusk, circling the station until dawn. I stopped, leaving the door open, taped the windows as best I could, and kept a heavy flashlight nearby. I even rigged a makeshift alarm from spare wires and an old car horn. It never went off. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to break in. It was just present. On day 13, a storm rolled in, full whiteout conditions. The wind howled louder than ever. The building shuddered, and for hours the power flickered. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. But it didn't. The footsteps stopped that night, and in the eerie silence afterward, I realized I missed them. It was the strangest comfort. When I finally got picked up 2 days later, I left everything behind: the station, the radio, the notes I'd taken. I never told anyone exactly what happened. People would say it was just the isolation, that I was hearing things. Maybe they're right. But every now and then, when the wind is just right and the air gets that sharp, biting cold, I swear I still hear those footsteps. They weren't human, but they were there. The footsteps kept coming every night after day 8. Sometimes they'd start just as the sun slipped below the horizon, circling the station like a slow, patient rhythm. But the sound was unmistakable. It wasn't just noise on snow. It wasn't just noise on snow. It was deliberate, measured steps, pacing the perimeter over and over. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe a fox or a lynx hunting nearby. But no animal moves that methodically, not that quiet. One night, I rigged a makeshift alarm system with some old wires and a horn. I stretched a wire around the edge of the building and connected it to the horn inside. When the wire was tripped, the horn would blow. But every night, when the footsteps started, the horn stayed silent. It was like whatever was out there knew exactly where the wire was and avoided it. It was watching me, testing me, but never crossing that invisible boundary. The radio started acting strange too. During quiet moments, faint voices came through on static. Sometimes my name, sometimes words I couldn't quite catch. I remember one night hearing someone whisper, "You're not alone," just barely loud enough for me to question my sanity. I would scan the frequencies, but nothing was out there. The equipment worked fine, but the interference was real and unsettling. One evening, a powerful snowstorm rolled in, turning the world white and silent. The wind tore at the station's walls, and the heater kept the cold at bay, but the footsteps stopped altogether. The silence that night was different, thick, heavy, almost expectant. I lay awake, listening to the howling wind, wondering if the absence of those steps was worse than their presence. When my rotation ended, I left the station without a word. I packed my gear, locked the door, and never looked back. People would say it was the isolation, maybe the cold, messing with my mind. Maybe they're right. But whenever I hear the wind whistle through the trees or snow crunch underfoot, I remember those slow, measured footsteps circling me in the night. And I know, somewhere out there, they're still watching. Story 7. I worked as a seasonal trapper in the far north back in the winter of 2015. A job that's almost become a relic these days. My cabin was tucked away miles from the nearest trail, surrounded by endless stretches of frozen forest and frozen lakes. The cold wasn't just a number on a thermometer. It was a force that wrapped around everything, making even the simplest tasks a challenge. I liked the isolation most of the time. It gave me space to think, to move slow, and to be in tune with the land. But that winter, Something about the silence and the endless white felt different, like there was something else out there that I couldn't see, but could definitely feel. One afternoon, after trudging through waist-deep snow, checking my traps, I got back to the cabin and noticed tracks in the fresh snow that immediately threw me off. They looked like footprints, but they weren't quite right. They were far too large and wide, with deep, uneven indentations where toes should have been. They didn't match any animal prints I knew either. No bear, no moose, nothing familiar. What made it worse was that the prints led straight up to the front door, circled the cabin once, and then vanished into the thick forest, like whoever or whatever had made them just melted away. I was certain someone had been out there, but there was no sign of a person, no broken branches or anything else disturbed in the snow. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself maybe it was a hunter or a trapper passing through. But the prints came back again and again over the following days. Each time, the pattern was the same. These oversized footprints would slowly circle the cabin, sometimes stopping near the woodpile or the outhouse, then disappear into the trees without a trace. It didn't feel random, more like a slow, purposeful patrol. At night, the quiet was shattered by strange sounds, low growls, or guttural breathing that didn't match any animal I'd ever heard. One night, I woke to the cabin, shaking, as if something was trying to force its way inside. I grabbed my old rifle and stood by the window, heart pounding, but the snow-covered woods outside were empty, silent, except for the wind. I wasn't just scared. It was like something was watching me, learning my routine, testing my defenses. My traps were being tampered with, but nothing was stolen. Sometimes the bait was untouched, but the trap itself was sprung or moved. It was like whoever or whatever was out there wasn't hungry. They were just marking territory, or maybe sending a message I couldn't understand. I kept thinking about the footprints, their strange shape, the way they circled but never approached directly. Whatever it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I knew. By the time I packed up and left that winter, I felt like I was being followed even as I drove away. The forest had changed from a place of peace to something else entirely, alive and watchful in ways I couldn't explain. Years later, when I pass through those woods or hear stories about strange sightings, I still think about those prints and the nights filled with unexplainable noises. The thought that something unknown still prowls those frozen forests keeps me looking over my shoulder. I know those footprints are out there somewhere, waiting. The nights after those first footprints showed up only got stranger. I tried to keep my head clear and stick to my routine, checking traps at dawn, logging everything, keeping the cabin locked up tight before nightfall. But every evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, the unease would settle in like a heavy fog. I'd sit near the window, rifle in hand, watching the tree line, waiting for something to show itself. The footsteps never came closer, just slow, deliberate circles around the cabin, always just beyond the reach of the porch light. One night, the breathing sounds got louder. They weren't just out in the woods anymore. They were almost inside the walls, shallow and ragged, like someone or something was holding its breath right outside. I could see my own reflection in the frost-covered window, but behind me, the cabin seemed to grow cold, like the warmth was being sucked out. I tried calling out, hoping maybe a lost hunter or traveler was nearby and needed help, but there was only silence in reply. The next morning, I found claw marks on the wooden doorframe, deep scratches that hadn't been there before. The wood was old and weathered, but these gouges looked fresh, like something strong had tried to force its way in. My traps were worse off too. One was completely destroyed, twisted and bent in ways that no animal could have done. I knew then that this wasn't some prank or coincidence. Whatever it wasn't going to leave me alone. By the time my rotation ended, I was ready to leave. I packed fast, double-checked the locks, and left behind most of my gear. Driving away, I looked back once, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement among the trees, a shadow too large to be a deer, slipping silently between the trunks. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me home. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees or snow crunches outside, I swear I hear footsteps just beyond the window, circling, waiting. I never went back, and I doubt I ever will.